Treats. I work at a company called OmniTI. Essentially, we provide web engineering resources as a service. In the course of our work, we've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of different companies and work with them and work with different engineers. We often see bias in what people do. I should caveat that the terms I'm about to use are actual terms. You could look them up on Wikipedia and probably understand what they really mean. I am not a psychologist. I'm not even the guy who originally made these slides. So, take it with a grain of salt. All right, let's start. Affinity bias, many of you have probably heard of this. It's basically this idea that we tend to want to hang out with people who kind of look like us, talk like us, are into the same things that we're into. We often hear that in the context of hiring, but what I want to talk about is in the context of sort of regular tech usage, right? Oftentimes you'll see like chef people like to hang out with chef people, puppet people with puppet people, MongoDB with people who don't care about data, right? Like you sort of aggregate with whoever has similar interests as you. And that's not a bad thing because you can use that on some level to get support and help from people, but it can lead to bad outcomes, right? If you start getting into like confirmation bias, where you're starting to see information through people who already believe the things that you believe, you may get information that's incoming one message, right? But you interpret that completely incorrect from what you really ought to be interpreting, right? You're seeing it as like, this is totally positive, when really maybe it's not a positive thing, it's a negative thing, right? And that's a problem that we tend to see. If you get enough people who follow that, you end up with another effect that we see is it's a bandwagon effect. You probably have all heard of some technology that you think fits this. Docker maybe might be a thing. I would say DevOps, a little bit of the bandwagon effect that's going on. This year, Kubernetes is the big thing. And the problem with this bandwagon effect is that if you do adopt these technologies early, you usually end up sort of suffering from the IKEA effect. And that is this idea that when you build something yourself, right, or you have a part in building it, you think it's better than what everybody else has, right? That easily feeds into ownership bias, which is the solution I have must be better than the solution that other people are using, right? It may not be. You think it is because you helped put it together, and you had to help put it together because it was too early to adopt it, right? And anyone who walked in off the street and saw what you were doing would probably be like, oh my God, what kind of sausage factory have I just stepped into, right? And that's, what we've seen over time is that you can really get used to those kinds of problems and sort of ignore it and think that your thing is the great thing. This only gets fed even further because of the sunk cost fallacy, right? This idea that like we've already spent so much time building this solution, we really can't afford to switch to something else. It won't take that much, we think, to extend it out and solve the next problem, when actually you could probably solve the next problem with something else and have a much better solution overall. Right? It's hard for people to let go of that, especially the more time and energy they put into it. So, thinking about all of that, and understanding that also when you've used these technologies for a long time, you start to fall into this comfort bias where you're very comfortable with the solution you have, you sort of know the quirks of it, you don't think it's a real problem, and you don't see those things that are actually issues. If you sit too much into that, right, you lose track of this idea that change is what really drives progress. Or I'll say that the flip way, that like you can't really have progress without some kind of change, right? And that's an important thing to remember. And in technology, sometimes people go overboard with that. Like they look at a solution, they don't like it, and it's like, well, let's just throw the whole thing away. We'll rewrite it all from scratch. I heard about this thing called Go, maybe we should use that instead. And that's also an overreaction to be aware of. On the flip side, there's a thing called the anti-IKEA effect, which is after you spend some time building something, oftentimes people react with the idea that I'm never going to manually build anything again. I will buy every solution off the shelf, I will never have to write code again, and that will solve all my problems. It won't solve all your problems, right? Usually those kinds of extreme reactions, they're really not the solution. I would also say be careful. Yes, you've just heard some nice terms, you probably recognize these patterns in your own life. Don't become the person who's like, oh, I recognize these and I'll just never do that. What you want to get is to a point where you can have healthy discussions with people. Maybe even a little bit, agitated discussions with people, both within your companies and when you go out to conferences like this and talk with your peer groups, right? If you're looking for some kind of maxim, maybe to get you started, if you're not sure where, how to break out of this chain, we often recommend buy what accelerates you, build the things that differentiate you. There are probably things you should focus on as core pieces. Slack is not one of them. As a final note, just something to think about. Don't take any of this too strongly. There are other problems in the world. Hopefully you want to still enjoy your job. So don't really, get on people if they fall into these traps. There are other things for us to think about. That's my time. Thanks very much. Happy to talk to you.